So you're going to give me 10 seconds or something?
No,
or
5 seconds.
when? Starting now or what? You starting? Yes? Welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Jacqueline Weld Drake. Is that correct?
No, I'm usually called Jackie Weld Drake.
Jacqueline Weld Drake. I'm terribly sorry I mispronounced that name. But anyway, welcome to the program. She's an interviewer, and she's also a philanthropist, and she is also a writer. She has written books and so forth. And but primarily, I think she's known as an interviewer. And Jackie, welcome so very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really, I consider myself first and foremost a writer because I've written 2 books. I wrote the biography of Peggy Guggenheim, and then I wrote Rara Avis, which is a novel, and I've written several introductions to art books, which I enjoy because when I started out in life, I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be an artist, and that to some degree is how I got to Peggy Guggenheim, because when I decided I perhaps was not the greatest artist on earth, I decided to write about it instead. And it's a funny story because it really was one of those aha moments. I was at the ballet in New York City watching Swan Lake with the great Danish dancers, and all of a sudden I had this aha about the artists in exile, because during the Second World War, many of them came to New York specifically to escape the war, and that's when Peggy came, and she became the center of that world of really fleeing refugees. And New York was really a cauldron of activity and intellectual ferment.
So when you when you did the painting, were you figurative or was it abstract, and did you really give it a try, or did?
Well, you know, when you're young, you're easily discouraged. I really liked figurative painting. I used to go to the Art Students League and draw from life, and I tended to be really good at that. But then when I went to Sarah Lawrence, I had a hard time moving into abstraction and finding the kind of structure that I needed. Years later, when I interviewed Clement Greenberg for my book, he flattered me by saying I was way too young then to really know if I had that talent or not. But I still like it. I was very good watercolorist. And actually, watercolor. You know, this coming up winter in Palm Beach, we're going to do a show of Florida artists in which my own work will be also maybe not featured but shown.
But then you're also a writer, and you have a book we're going to show here. I got it on the side, and so maybe you could talk a little bit about that. But I wonder if maybe we could veer off a little bit and say, where were you born and raised, that sort of thing. And let's get this down at the beginning, and because you have a sort of interesting background in terms of where you were born and raised and grew up.
Well, yes, it's not the run of the mill. My parents, my mother was from Uruguay and my father was from Venezuela. And they met sometime after the war. My father was in Uruguay waiting for a shipment of something or another, and he was at the Victoria Plaza, which was the favorite hotel in Montevideo, Uruguay. And there he ran into my grandmother and another lady who he knew from Chile. So he introduced himself and intruded on their table, and my mother came running by, coming home from school. And my father took one look and said, "Is this the woman I'm going to marry?" Well, in any event, he did marry my mother, and but not before showing my grandfather his bank account. And he famously said, "I have enough money to support your daughter and 4 more." And this was great family lore because, in fact, I'm one of 4 sisters. And so they went on their honeymoon. Actually, there are pictures of the beginning of the honeymoon with my grandmother and several other people also on the honeymoon. And they took about a year. They went from Brazil, they went from Rio to Mexico to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, all across the country. And they wind up in New York more than the adequate 9 months later. And my mother, they were on their way to London to have me, which it was pointed out to my mother, it was not the greatest idea because it was after the war and there were limited medical supplies. London was burned out and so on. And so I was born by true accident, really, at the St. Moritz Hotel. And that is the reason my parents came to New York.
Boy, that is really something else, really.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And my father was like 20 years older than my mother, which made the story even more interesting.
Boy, you ought to write that up. It's it's in the Akashic record, you know. I mean,
well, it's also
it's all down. Yeah.
My book on Rara Avis, which is here, it sort of surrealizes it, if you will. But much of that story is somehow in there. But the story of my family is a really interesting one. My mother came from one of the elite families of Uruguay. Her great-grandfather was president of Uruguay.
Wow.
And he was assassinated. And Borges wrote a story about him in the Book of Sand. But he wrote a book about him from the point of view of the assassin. So we have this really interesting, I think, story and background. It makes us all who we are.
I'll say so. And what about the Venezuela, did you say?
My father was from Venezuela. He came originally from Europe. And he wound up in Venezuela.
Spain? From Spain?
No, from the Bukovina, which was the crossroad of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that is also fascinating.
Yes.
That area of the world was written about by Gregor von Retzery. And when you read about it, it is amazing because my father could speak 7 languages.
Wow.
And that is typical of people who come from that area because there were so many, as I said, it was a crossroads. So I had interesting parents.
Yeah. Have you picked up other languages?
I tried. I studied French. But it's very different studying French than having it by osmosis, the way I have my Spanish and my English. But I can speak French and I can understand Italian, and if I've had a nice evening of a lot of Pinot Grigio, I can speak it fluently.
Really? That makes a difference.
I can even speak Russian.
Yeah, right, you can do, I think there's 7,000 languages, a number you could try to get under your belt if you could, but that's a lot of work and everything like that. Now you're also, the writing, is that important to you?
Yes.
And you're also billed as an interviewer, not, in an almost more than normal sense that people can sit down and talk to other people, but there's certain skills and so forth that are involved, and you count that as part of your identity.
Well, the truth is, I mean, when I wrote my book on Peggy Guggenheim, I did at least 200 interviews.
Wow.
And you sort of learn how to do them. Basically, you research and you're really prepared, because if you go to interview somebody and you don't know about them and what they might be able to tell you, then you can't follow the story or add to the story. So my interviewing career came when my friend Jeanette Watson asked me if I would have a conversation with Joyce Carol Oates at one of the
one of New
York's
luminaries.
clubs.
Yeah, right.
And I knew better than to think it was a conversation, so I did what I was used to doing. I really prepared for that conversation, which was an interview. And I was told that Joyce Carol Oates was going to speak for 20 minutes, but the fact is she spoke for maybe 5. And then I said, whoops, I now have to fill up the rest of the 40 minutes that this is on. And somehow I had the intuition that her writing was about secrets that a little girl is witness to, but are so horrible she can't tell.
Wow, what a story.
So all of a sudden she starts to cry. And she says, I've never told this to anyone before. And she tells a story about how her mother was given away by her grandmother to some person down the way, and the little girl would come home to her mother and she would have the door slammed in her face. So that was my first interview ever, and I said, Larry King, watch out. So from there I've done quite a few interviews of extremely interesting people and of writers mostly. In Palm Beach I did a series called The Author's Breakfast, and I had a number of really interesting writer guests, including Tony Mendez, who was the real CIA agent who exfiltrated the Americans from Iran. And that was a fascinating story, and his story was turned into the movie Argo.
That was more the contemporary scene.
Yes, so that was, it was riveting. And because he'd exfiltrated something. Then I learned the lingo, something like 1,500 people, and much of the movie had to be made cinematic. So some of the things were not technically true, but were emotionally true. And he said that the interesting thing he said was those costumes and so on are not so much to fool people, but to make the people you're exfiltrating feel comfortable.
Exfiltrating is a word. I'm not sure. What does that mean? I don't know.
You're taking out
Yeah.
what you would call an asset from the country. Let's say a person, technically the asset I would think is a spy. And you're taking him out from his country of origin. Let's say you have a Russian spy and you want to get him out of Russia. That's an exfiltration.
I've never heard of that.
As opposed to an infiltration.
Exfiltration. Boy, I'm telling you, learning there. That's really an interesting use of the language and everything.
Isn't it?
Interesting language. Yeah. Are you more comfortable in English or Spanish?
Well, I hate to admit it, but lately I am more comfortable in English because I studied in English. I speak English.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't be. But I keep up my Spanish, and I'm chairman of an organization called Casita Maria Inc., and I'm extremely involved. These are the oldest Hispanic charity in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, they were founded by two sisters in 1936 when there was an influx of Puerto Rican children, and they realized, they were school teachers, they realized that not only did these kids not speak English and would have a problem with language, they would have a problem with the entire change of the school system and so on. And that's how we started, and we are known for our after school and other programs. And the irony is that now with the devastation this hurricane has brought upon Puerto Rico,
horrible,
we are primed to actually be the agency or the organization that is best situated to help what are surely going to be the new immigrant wave. And I'm very involved now. One of the things that keeps me busy is, as chairman, I chair their annual fundraising gala called Fiesta, which is a tremendously fun party, and it's one of the liveliest parties in New York, and people come every year because it's a dancing party and they have fun.
Yeah.
But it's also for a serious purpose to
support the institute.
To support what is really.
Is it called Casa? What is it again?
Casita
Maria.
Little. Casita
Maria,
means house,
yeah.
Little house, and Maria
is Maria.
Maria.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
good for you on that work and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And then you're also billed as as a philanthropist.
Yes.
So
actually,
you talk Casita Maria and other things, but you're involved in trying to help good causes. And
exactly.
That sort of thing.
I mean,
mm-hmm.
it just is part of who I am. When I went to law school, I went to Columbia Law School, and I went out and worked for Colorado Rural Legal Services. And that was out in Alamosa, Colorado, out west. And it was deemed that I would be helpful because I speak Spanish. And you have a lot of Chicanos out there. This made me extremely interested in the history of the Spanish in the New World, because the real discoverers, I mean, they came here way before the English. And Coronado went up to Florida, and then he came back again with a lot of men, and then they made a journey and wound up going up as far as Colorado and New Mexico and so on, leaving pockets of Spanish-speaking people, because the men who came had a wonderful time when they were here, and they didn't want to go back. So that also intrigued me. But the point is, so when I went to Colorado, I also practiced what I would call law for the poor, and I had about 130 clients, and dealt with it. And one of my first clients ever was a man who came in. I had just graduated Columbia Law School, where they don't teach you that much practical law. And he came in and he said, "I just shot and killed a man." So I said to myself, "Whoops."
Yeah.
And I really didn't know what to do, and so I said, "Excuse me a minute." And I went to see the head of the firm, and I said, "My gosh, this man has just shot and killed somebody." And he said, "Well, we can't take the case because it's a criminal case, and we can only take civil cases, but get the facts." So I go back in, and it turned out that this client had gone turkey shooting, and the victim had camouflaged himself as a turkey and made turkey noises. So what was my client to do? So he shot him. And he was looking at me, and he said he had to go to the widow and tell her what he'd done. And he said, the terrible thing is, hunting is my life. And he was so worried about losing his hunting license. But I sent him off to the public defender because I couldn't handle it.
How did it end up to Clarence Darrow for the defense?
It went up like
yeah.
6 times to the Colorado Court of Appeals.
I'll bet.
Because was it manslaughter? Was it an accident? But there was some.
How did you handle it?
Well, I said
Yeah,
I can't
Yeah.
take the case because I can only handle civil cases.
Now you're doing the arts and that sort of thing, and you have all this concern for that in an interviewer, and then you did law as well.
Yes, I did.
And the law is. Did you enjoy being involved in the law, or the learning of the law and practicing of law? Do you practice it a lot? Is it a major part of your resume or your background or your activity?
Not anymore, really.
Not
but
really. Okay.
A lot of me is explained by the fact that I went to Sarah Lawrence. And when I was at Sarah Lawrence, I studied with Joseph Campbell.
The Joseph Campbell, yeah. Wow.
None other than Joseph Campbell.
Wow.
And Ada Bozeman. And Ada Bozeman wrote Politics and Culture and World Affairs. And of course, Bozeman spoke about mythology. So Bozeman gave me a book by Henry Maine called Ancient Law, which is all about the law of the Greeks and the common law, and it's just riveting.
Had you done law by then?
No.
No.
And so she gives me this book,
Yeah.
and she insists, because I was, didn't know where to go on. I wanted to study mythology, I wanted to study art, but she said the careers are very limited in these places. So she said, you're going to study law, and you're going to sit there, and you may be bored to death, but you're going to get your degree, and then you're going to be like me. She was a barrister, and she went down the Congo and ate human flesh, and when I heard her life and read the Henry Maine, I said, well, gosh, this is going to be fascinating. And then I went to see Mr. Campbell, and he told me all about, when I went to Alamosa, he told me all about the penitentes out in the Southwest, and these people used to crucify one of their own members, and that practice was outlawed, but I was always on the lookout for strange religious cults, such as the ones I had studied with Joseph Campbell.
You have a wide-ranging interest. You said we talked in pre-talk as we were getting ready to do this. That we're both, in a certain sense, interested in, or there ought to be a department in the educational process of everything. Are you trying to see things in a systems way? Political, these kind of things? You have a wide sweeping, or do you tend to focus on something for maybe a decade at a time or something?
No, I'm always, I think my fascinations have certain commonalities. I still remain absolutely fascinated by myth and religion and I guess the human psyche.
Yeah,
I love explaining things to myself, and finding an etymology. I love the study of religion. Now I've gone on a jag about the conquistadores and the conquest of the New World.
It was pretty grim.
Oh no, I mean, well,
for the indigenous, I mean.
Yeah, but you know, I don't. The thing is, when you read about these adventures, I'm saying, it is riveting to see how the Spaniards did conquer that world, and they were sneaky as could be. But Lawrence Bergreen writes about Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe. It reads like a novel. It is unbelievable. These men had courage beyond measure. They're going into the unknown. And they don't have freezers or refrigerators.
That's right. They
have to stop at
salt pork.
They have to stop at completely unknown ports, I would say, to get food, to get water, and they don't know what they're going to find, and they have to trade if they run into natives, and then he crosses over Magellan. He starts, in the north of Africa, crosses over, winds up in Brazil, which of course is gorgeous. So the Bahia of Rio is one of God's most beautiful creations.
But in terms of the exploration and the Hispanic and that, I would suppose the major one that is there is right around the corner here at Columbus Circle, Christopher Columbus.
Yes. Well,
and Christopher Columbus discovered America, and that was did you read any of Morrison? Did you like him or not?
Well, no, I loved Lawrence Bergreen's writing.
Okay.
And he wrote about the 4 voyages of Columbus. And what Columbus was an incredible navigator.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he really navigated those ships. And then they discovered I may be wrong, but it took them like 2, maybe 3 weeks to get to the New World. And he really discovered that whole area. And the Spaniards then knew or did build on that.
Yeah, what Taviano wrote, they wrote on it and everything. And also, humanity, we're all African, we all come out of Africa. There's a great deal of movement of early mankind over to the east, across, and then the indigenous people came from Beringia and down into the New World and so forth. And so the world was divided in 1492 by those that had moved to the east, inhabiting first the New World, and then the other people that were coming from the west, and they had not extended their sway, the Europeans, beyond just a couple of lines of latitude or longitude to the west until Christopher Columbus. But on that, and we're coming up to Columbus Day.
Yes, we are.
Coming up, and on the day at Santiago, and when he discovered that, the Taviano brothers that were from Spain, there had been a mutiny 3 or 4 days before that. The men wanted to go back, including the Pinzon brothers, who were captaining the other 2 ships. And he said, "Give me I need to have 3 more days, because there had been signs of bird, and that there could be sight." And they sighted on the evening of the 3rd day, at a certain line of longitude, a flame in the fire. So romantic. This is the mixing. This is the meeting of the easternmost and the westernmost extensions of mankind from our original source or place of being, which was Africa, and it was meeting. And that line of longitude, I did a careful drawing of that. And do you know where that line of longitude goes toward the north?
No.
That line of the meeting of the westernmost and the easternmost extensions of mankind, it comes ashore in Brooklyn. And it crosses and is the official line of longitude right down to the degree and second of longitude. It is the official designation of the United States, the United Nations of the world.
Wow.
Isn't that sort of an interesting sort of coalition or coordination of various factors out of history?
It's just so interesting. Humans are so interesting.
Isn't it, though? The whole human story.
Yeah. Are so interesting.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was fascinated by Egyptian mythology and Egyptian lore.
Yeah, you like the Egyptian.
I like ancient civilizations. I really enjoy reading about ancient Greek and ancient civilizations. I really liked, and I hope I don't massacre his name, Cole Tobin's book called The Names. And it's a reinvention of the story of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon. And it is so beautifully written, just beautifully written. And that's came out recently, and I
that's interesting in itself. The writing can be really important, just like in painting. The fact of the ingredients of it is something like the actual happening, and then the degree at which it can be conveyed is an artful kind of thing that's really important.
Well, any story well told is worth reading.
Well told better than well written?
Well told is well written.
You think so, yeah?
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's what I consider well told, is where the writing is so good that you're immediately drawn in. I love Balzac, for example. I love the French writer.
Balzac.
You read the first paragraph and you're there. You have to be willing to suspend disbelief.
Yeah.
And the writer doesn't do that immediately. Then you're not going to read it. And I think the best nonfiction and biographies are written by people who have a novelistic bent or who were novelists. I actually have to boast a little bit that my darling late husband, Rodman Drake, started a biography prize at Penn and named it after me. And every year we give a prize for the best biography of the year. And I'm very pleased and proud of that, because I think great biographies are very difficult to write, and you need all kinds of skills to make it work.
Do you count yourself a writer then as well, as a
Well, yes,
interviewer and
yeah.
a philanthropist, right? But
Well,
as a writer.
Basically, I think of myself as a writer.
Oh, really? Okay.
A writer who somehow is good at doing interviews. It's just a gift I seem to have, only because, as we've been discussing, I have a lot of interest and I've done a lot of reading, so I can talk about anything most of the time, and not anything in depth, but so one is related to the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Well,
trying to write a book now on American illustrators, because my late husband and I collected American illustration art. And we started with a picture I bought at a flea market. I had seen these beautiful drawings, and I could tell because I used to paint and I used to draw, and still do. I know what it takes to have a good drawing. And I said, these are really beautiful. And they were signed 1939 Rodman. And I said, well, to the flea market person, how much you want for them? And he said, oh, give me $15 each. So for $60, I bought 4 of these. And my husband was so curious, he had to get to the bottom of what these were. And then we discovered Illustration House, where we found more and more illustrations, and then we became just hooked on American illustration. And that's a really fun area, and I've given lectures on our collection, and I also got very interested in fashion illustrators, basically because they are so beautiful. And only the early ones, and I think the French fashion illustrators are the best, but we also have Eric, who worked for Vogue and was evidently quite a character, always showed up in his white suits. And we have Le Pape, who's a legendary French illustrator. But anyway, it's sort of fun to see. Again, I like the past, and I love all the deco era of decoration and illustration, and so that's a lot of fun.
There's certainly a lot to be able to enjoy in all of that. There's so much of it been done, and so
Yeah.
forth. And that, I wonder, what is your overall reading? You've had a very checkered lifetime and life experience and so forth. What is your overall your reading of the human condition? Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or what is your overall reading of the human condition in this year 2017?
I am hugely optimistic.
You are optimistic, okay?
Optimistic, because Joseph Campbell used to say there are waves of activity.
Yeah.
There are waves of Western thought, there are waves of Eastern thoughts, but these are waves. Right now we're in a wave of, I would call it, well, I don't know what we're in the wave of now.
It's
Natural
a little
disasters
confusing, isn't it? Yeah.
Are sui generis, but I always said the 21st century is the age of fundamentalism.
Well, could you spell it out a little bit? What
the age
term?
of fundamentalism.
Yeah,
you
I know.
have the Islamic fundamentalism. You have in the United States the evangelical, fastest growing religion, I think. I don't want to say the world, but I know in South America is evangelicism. These are higher levels. What's also interesting about the United States is that the people who came here were also looking, I would say they were religious fundamentalists, and that's the core of the United States, which is very interesting.
Is that the same thing in your view as identity politics that seems to be raising its head all over the world now in a way that's really kind of interesting? It's not so much, is my way of thinking. Identity politics seem to be emerging with all kinds of consequences.
Well, what I'm talking about is the waves of thinking. The Eastern thinking, like you have Islam and so on, and then soon you're going to have the Western thinking, which is more linear, which is more
well, Islam is part of the
Greek.
Western tradition. Well, Islam is part of the Western tradition.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it's just a wave of Eastern Eastern belief systems. I don't think of Islam as a Western belief system.
You don't?
I do not.
Okay.
But correct me if I'm wrong. But I sort of lost track of what I was going to say. Oh yes, I think identity politics is really shameless manipulation of people.
Yeah, it is, but it's raising its head.
It's raising its head because politicians,
really seriously.
Because
Brexit
politicians think. Brexit is not so much identity politics.
You don't think?
No. But it has been used by politicians to get themselves elected, and I think it's disgusting. I think in this country people lose sight of the fact that it has always been black and white together.
Mhm.
Wynton Marsalis, who I admire enormously,
Yeah, it's great.
at the Aspen Institute actually said that.
Uh-huh.
And I said, somebody has to say it, but they don't. And I think the previous administration really let people down, because he is the one who should have said something like that. But I think spent every opportunity to make the difference. And it's really totally, in my view,
Yeah.
cynical politics.
Identity, are you talking about, no,
Identity politics in this country.
you don't think it's on the rise?
Of course, it's being used. That's why it's on
Yeah,
the
it
rise.
is being used for, why is it emerging now so strongly, do you think?
Because
As
people
opposed to, say, economic-based or political or
because
normal?
you've had administrations, let's put it that way,
Yeah.
who benefited from that, who actually had game plans of how we're going to win an election.
Mhm.
And they win it by identity. So they attract this group and that group and this
Yeah.
group and that group. Instead of thinking holistically, what am I going to do for the entire country? Nobody thinks that way. And so they look for this base and they activate the base. Well, I'm not a political expert, but
Oh,
I
no,
think that
right,
like something like gerrymandering, which they do, means
Yeah.
that you're going to have the same kind of thinking in each one of these pockets. That means that they don't have to get together on anything, because they're going to get elected by those particular constituents. But if you had an area that was bigger and included people of different parties and belief systems, you might really get nonpartisan solutions.
So you're optimistic for the human prospect?
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Because
you
I
are.
think-
You think
I hope
absolutely, okay.
That humans
yeah.
are going to be, beyond the idiocy of their politicians, and
Are they going to be beyond the institutions that we've inherited out of a historical condition, where there may be qualitative new developments that are coming that are not based in the historical record that we base most of our thinking upon? We're very much tied up with the historical patterns, and there seem to be new things being called for by the technological and political and economic development of the species.
I'm
You don't
not
think
quite
we're
sure
at a
what you're
time of
asking.
qualitative transformation?
Oh, of course we are.
We
But
are
it's not-
qualitative, not
but-
quantitative, historical.
Well, I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but I think that, of course, we are in a whole new world. What's interesting is
We in this era.
Yes, in this era.
Okay, yeah.
I do recall, the opening of the Soviet Union. That was the revolution.
Remember
CNN.
that? Yeah.
And CNN revolutionized Russia because now news was everywhere. And
Yeah,
now we have
yeah.
this technological
Yeah.
advancement. It's also iffy because, as you say, as you've seen, you can put anything up on the internet, and you can put terrible things and good things and what have you. But I think this technological innovation is amazing. There was a tech conference, or I went to a tech talk.
Yeah,
What I think that we have to watch out for.
A TED talk or tech?
No, a talk on technology.
Not TED talk.
No,
Okay,
on
that's different.
technology.
Okay, yeah.
What we have to watch out for, and we have to be focused on, is education, but not by spending money, because we spend more money per capita on education than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
But we are not educating people because I think in the city of New York, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's like 60, 70 or more % of your education dollar goes to administration. I mean,
Is that generally characteristic of the Western economy?
it's very
To
characteristic of states.
administration-like kinds of things, yeah.
It's really not about Western economy. No
No,
company could operate on that. It's because you have a political system which rewards this, and you have an entrenched teachers union, which I'm happy to say is the biggest impediment to education in the United States, and certainly in this city.
Mhm.
And so what's happening with our technological innovation is children need to be educated. And if they are not, they're not going to win out in this economy, because it's an economy of math and skills that need to be taught. And so I did ask a question, is when are people going to stand up and talk against the politicians and the teachers' unions who don't allow our children to be educated?
Why do you think that is?
Because they're entrenched. The union is entrenched, and because the politicians, you have the union electing the politicians who are the ones who are going to set their salaries.
You think the unions are that powerful?
Yes.
You do, in the case of education or
Well,
in general?
just look at what de Blasio
Do you think
is
labor
doing.
is that strong in this country? It
The
doesn't seem to
teachers'
me
union
long.
is. The
Well,
biggest-
teachers' union is, you think that's unique, but the
Well, I
union
don't know.
movement is sort of
Is
moribund.
strangling the country to. Well,
You
I
think
don't
it's
wanna get-
moribund?
I don't. I think it's.
Oh, I mean,
I
it's
could
just
just
a different
speak to
view
the
of the
teachers'
human
union.
condition.
I
Oh,
can speak
well,
to
if
the
you want
teachers
to,
union.
okay, that's.
I don't know about all unions and so on. I just don't. But there's a lot of payback when you've been elected by a group. The biggest donors to the Democratic Party, I believe, are the teachers union.
It's the same with the Republican Party, isn't it? It's
No,
all
the
paid for.
teachers union is not.
Oh, with respect to the teachers union, only we want to talk about, right? Okay.
Yeah, I don't
Not
know
the
other
other
unions. What other? I don't.
No,
think
the
that-
other organizational functions or organizational structure of the union itself, of the country or
Yes,
of the
it
world.
is very.
You know.
It was necessary at
You
one
think the
point.
world is just as it's set up now in terms of the whole condition of the human
Well,
condition?
I'm not a world politician. I don't know. I mean,
Oh,
you have,
uh-huh.
you definitely have justice and not justice.
You
But
think
we
we've
can-
had justice historically?
where?
Or have we had, like you're at Latin America and so forth, I thought that
think you
the
had
treatment of the indigenous people was pretty grim on the whole, and in fact the whole crime of realpolitik, whoever's got the biggest army can control and set up the standards, and people
This
have
is
been
not-
enslaved more or
Isn't
less.
that really something of my expertise?
Oh, it's
This
not.
is
oh,
not
it's-
something.
Okay.
But you have to think
Yeah.
in the conquest of the Americas.
Yeah.
What did in the Native Americans were the European diseases. You cannot discount.
Not only the diseases,
this-
there's very much cruelty on the part of the people who were conquerors as
also,
well.
but what really
And that's
did
the
is-
history of the world.
What did humans are animals in the end?
Yeah,
and,
right.
You know.
And very vicious very often.
Well,
and
I'd like to not talk about that.
Oh,
because
okay, you don't want to talk about
Well, it's just
that.
not my area of
Yeah.
expertise.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Okay, fine. Well, okay. So anyway, so you're doing that that kind of a thing, and I'm glad you're doing all that work. You are optimistic for the human prospect.
I really am. I've always been optimistic because I
Uh-huh.
think people absorb the bad and go on, and I think education, and I mean real education, and I think
Real education is
communication.
what?
People who can
Math or
read,
what?
no,
Or read?
people who can read and write when they graduate high school.
You don't think reading is
very
going
involved.
by the boards?
No, how can you not read and use a computer today?
I think it's going to be primarily multimedia is going to be the way in which the store of human knowledge is going to be passed on, and not literate. I think
But
the
you're-
printing press is out of date.
But let us not confuse reading a printed page with
Linear
not
thinking.
reading.
Linear
Because-
rational
no,
thinking.
No, you have to be able to read to use a computer. You cannot learn or get online and get your news unless you know how to put in a word or
Do you think
two.
they'd ever be able, there's 7,000 languages, do you think they'll ever be able to have an algorithmic system that can in real time translate the 7,000 languages
I think
one
there
into
already
the other?
are.
And why haven't we developed that when we couldn't get over the language barrier so that we wouldn't
I
have to
believe we
deal
haven't.
with print?
I believe. Well, how are you going to do it by gut
Oh,
sounds?
rhythmically. No, well, okay. I mean, I think that's something that's on the horizon and is transforming the whole world.
I think people need to be able to read, write. You need to know a certain amount. You cannot write code if you have graduated high school without being able to read. What I was going to say is
Yeah,
one of the
go ahead.
organizations I'm very involved with,
Yes.
Literacy Partners, 1 in 5 New Yorkers is functionally illiterate. I'm happy to say I got an award from them for my work for literacy.
I think, yeah.
And so that means that people can read, but they can't really function. They can't read the name of a subway stop. When they go to a store, they can't read the name of the departments. When they go home, they can't read their children a story or help them with their homework. And notice how many times you'll see an elderly person or somebody with someone else there to fill out a form. It's because they really can't read.
You're right. That's very
And
part
to
of the,
me,
yeah.
That's the
Mm.
disgrace of the educational system here.
Well, we disagree, and that's the way the world is.
Yeah.
I think that's that's not the way the world's going. I think it's going multi. Are you paying attention to the fact of the? You were familiar with the Watsons at IBM. That was a major company in the world
Yeah.
in terms of the bringing of the new computer capability, and now the information technology seems to be formulating virtually everything. And so now you see it's transmogrifying into robotics. And the robotics are coming out of Hans Morgenthau and all of that. It's going not just information technology, but robotics, and it's threatening the whole prediction of a situation where human activity, human labor is going to be relevant to the productive process and is going to be superseded by a highly cyberneted and robotized world. Have you been paying attention to that?
I have thought of all that. When I was at Sarah Lawrence and studying philosophy, we already had books on how, robots were going to take over the world. People have been afraid of the machine.
You're right.
Since the first machine arrived.
You're right.
I don't buy that. But
no, you don't. Okay, that's interesting.
No, although I
that
think
is the standard view
but the world is
of it.
going to be using robots. That's why again I'm saying you're going to have an economy of intellectual and technological knowledge, which is why you cannot allow kids to graduate high school without the ability to read and write or add. And that's what we're doing. You cannot have these kids, they're not going to be able to catch up and get jobs. It's really an intellectual society. And that's the...
You don't think we're going to have massive unemployment? That's what's being touted in all the circles.
We're going to have different employment. And
really?
I think that
because that's the way we distribute buying power to the mass of the people, is through having a job.
But not all jobs are manufacturing jobs.
No, not manufacturing, all jobs.
Yeah, I don't think, this is I'm not an economic expert.
Yeah, okay.
But I remember a man saying years ago, the NRDC, he said American industry is going to actually find the solutions to some of these problems. And now
I'm sorry, what's the NRDC?
Natural Resources Defense Council.
Oh, thank you, I wasn't familiar.
And in any event,
right.
He said that about cars. He said every country in the world can produce a car.
Yeah.
But the competitive advantage is going to be producing a different car. And today, this morning in the New York Times, I think I saw it, about how the automotive companies are gearing towards more and more cars that are not using that much gasoline.
Yeah, I think there are alternate ways, alternate energy is a system, right?
And they're working on it because that's where the competitive advantage is.
Have you had thought about this thing about global warming and so forth and that? What is your feeling about that? There seems to be some objection to it.
There are
the
some
current
objections.
Administration, for instance.
Well, I don't think the current...
the
current
United States
administration is against, I believe, certain protocols, many of which are probably non-enforceable, etc. But I think that there is global warming, and we have to be mindful. I also think, again, optimistically, that there will be some kind of solution to it. And I also think we can't blame absolutely everything on global warming.
No, that wouldn't be fair or right.
I mean, El Nino and these things have been around forever, and the Earth has changed forever. There's been and so on. So what I don't know is how much is just total hype. Every time it rains, it's global warming.
Right. That's the trouble. You can get all this propagandistic kind of thing with people running. It's like identity politics in terms of economic theorizing. Memes.
I'm stunned by how people will hold on
to a meme,
to opinions and beliefs that are proven wrong time after time. It doesn't matter.
It's a meme.
It's a meme. And it's held on to. But no, there is global warming is real.
Yeah.
And
how about, if I could, on the other thing, on this thing, we got this fellow in North Korea with an atomic bomb, or with a hydrogen bomb now. They can be put upon the top of a missile. And we have an administration here that seems to be taking a certain attitude toward that. And what about that idea of the weapon systems? I've seen modeling, I wonder if you have, that the weapon systems collectively, particularly the tridents in our fleet, but collectively in terms of the whole human society, if they were, as they have been throughout most all of history, unleashed in wars of great destruction, one tribe against another and so forth, unleashed, it would mean the end of our species. Have you seen modeling along those lines or given it any thought that we now have a qualitative transformative situation geopolitically or in terms of evolutionary
We
terms.
have always had this.
No,
You
we
know,
didn't have
since we
that.
were little kids
Well,
and
okay.
hiding under our desks, there was a threat of nuclear war.
You're too young to remember the Cuban
I'm
Missile
extremely
Crisis.
young, but I remember some of this.
The crisis.
I vaguely remember it.
Oh, I remember. I was scared out of my wits. So
Well,
that was
in
the
any
Cuban
event,
thing. Yeah, yeah.
In any event,
Yeah.
all these things happen. And
Mhm.
what's interesting, I go to Aspen in the summer, and
Yeah.
and they have wonderful programs,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they have a security forum.
Uh-huh.
And at that security forum, they had the head of the CIA, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. They had John Kelly
Mhm.
speaking, and
yeah.
the former chairman of the CIA and former national security advisors.
Uh-huh.
The interesting thing that they said was the only thing that works in a world like we have is deterrence. What stops Putin is the fear that we're going to deter him. The only thing that's going to work with the Korean is deterrence. And they said we are not paying enough attention to these appropriations because he said by, I forgot what year, let's say 2020, 2025, we are no longer going to be the world's greatest military power. And that is the danger. Because right now we
It's
can...
going to be China, is it? Is
If
it
it's
China's
China
gonna
that's the
surpass
greatest,
us? Yeah, it looks
if
like
it's
that
the
way.
Russian,
Yeah.
if it's the Korean, we're in deep trouble.
But we were protected in our impotence because as recently as the Second World War, we were trying as hard as we possibly could to kill each other in a thing, or much less the First World War in Europe, which was a horror. And we were trying full tilt boogie to kill ourselves, but we were impotent at the level of species. Now there's modeling that shows
don't
we
know
no
what you're
longer
actually saying,
no
yeah.
the collective destructive capability of the weapons of destruction which have been used in a realpolitik reading of the world, where whoever's got the biggest gun can rule and run
Well, I
things.
hate to tell you, that's the truth.
Yeah. But now the
And
thing
it's
is,
better if we have the biggest gun than if some Mr. Korea has it. So in any event, I don't
well, these
like
things
to
you don't think
these
about
things,
that
and
much. Yeah.
I mean, of course one thinks about it, but they don't rule my life because I think.
Oh, right.
I
Good.
think
That's
that
good.
Things, I
Yeah.
think things do evolve. I do think deterrence is the best way. I do believe that we need a strong military, and nobody goes around trying to kill people. But I found another interesting.
What
I've
was
read-
that happened in Las Vegas last night?
Well,
That was a
one
horrible
lunatic.
thing.
What we have done is we somehow have lunatics running around.
Yeah, isn't it true? Doesn't
and
it bother
nobody
you?
needs an
Yeah.
assault weapon.
Yeah. Right.
But there
Yeah.
is, I read two books that were sort of interesting.
Uh-huh.
One was the Discovery of the French,
Yeah.
and another one was Europe before 1648.
Uh-huh.
And, well, Europe before 1648 tells you that, every 30 years or so there would be a crisis, there would be a plague, there would be a war, and they would
Yeah.
wipe out 20% of the population.
Right. It was a standard thing out of human history.
But it was a standard in the same way it's standard, I hate to compare us to animal societies,
yeah.
but it's a culling of the herd.
Right.
And
Well, that's
it's
yeah.
horrible, but it's really about being able to use the resources that are there.
Yeah, but
So
have
I
you ever?
think
Yeah.
that this
Okay.
impulse to war and so on is the vestige, if not the actuality, of this impulse.
Yeah,
to,
but that system of evolution does does weed out species that overextend themselves and destroy themselves, and we now have the capability of destroying our species collectively, which we have never had for 200,000 years of our existence.
We don't
It's
have
a new something that ought to be taken attention
we have
to.
the capability.
The capability is
We
in
do.
our hands, of the
We
United
do.
States of America.
We do.
Well, no, collectively though, there is others.
Nobody's going to, so who is going to undertake the destruction? I mean, you have to be careful with these rogue states. As long as we're the biggest...
But we're
one-
not a rogue state ever.
That's right. We're
Okay,
not.
no, we're not. Okay, well then you're a patriotic American who thinks America is the hope of the world.
I do.
And-
I
okay.
really do.
Well, that's a way.
It's
That's
the
a
greatest experiment in history.
It is. I
It's the
think you
greatest,
agree. Yeah.
I really believe, greatest
Yeah.
country in history.
Uh-huh.
It's the greatest system.
Uh-huh.
And,
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, that
there's
is
nothing
probably
better.
true. Yeah.
But anyway, this again, I'm not a political person.
Yeah. Oh, you're not. Well, okay. Well, anyway, it's just an interesting time to be alive. I just think it's been 200. We now know it's 200,000 years ago that our species came out of Homo erectus. And it was. I thought it was Homo habilis.
We had wiped out the Neanderthals too.
Well, yeah. So, and it's a process. Now we are on the verge of particularly, or we have the capability now. We never have for 200,000 years, 10,000 generations. We've been here, and we've never had the capability collectively, technologically extended of our consciousness to have weapon systems that could do ourselves in.
Well,
we do now have
about that already, and I mean,
Okay.
and I think we've.
But on the adverse,
but I think there's a very interesting book called *Sapiens*.
Yeah.
And
who's done that? Who wrote that?
I forgot his name, but he's an Israeli scholar, and the book is brilliant, and it's a history of mankind.
Recently? Is it recent?
Yes, it's a recent
*Sapiens*.
book.
Thank you for that.
*Sapiens*. And it's it may have been out a couple of years, but it's still on the bestseller list of the e-books. If you look at the New York Times, it's still one of the top sellers of print and e-book.
Thank you. Tell me about what does it say?
And *Sapiens* follows humans, and he makes very interesting points that wherever we've gone, we've changed the environment. We have, for example, you know, when we started to cultivate wheat, we destroyed swaths of land. Because wheat takes up a big piece of land, and they have to cut down the trees and so on. We probably had something to do with the destruction of quite a few species. But in any event, it's just very interesting about how mankind evolved and spread around the world.
Yeah, well, there are four main places where they got agriculture beyond hunting and gathering.
Well, the minute you have agriculture, you've changed your environment.
Well, you've had wheat and barley, rice, maize in Latin America, and
you've changed the environment. Anyway, it's a riveting book, and it's a wonderful history that's been out recently.
I was just seeing things in dialectic terms and everything, that this destructive capability is there. Whether it's there in the hands of whoever is running it, it looks like maybe China's going to succeed us as the leader of the world. Possibly that seems to be developing as a possibility. And I don't think we can set our standard to be, we're so inured or impossible for us to do anything wrong. That is our nation and so forth. We've done a lot of wrongs and so forth. But on the other side,
I really don't like that storyline that's just come out. Somehow we are terrible. We've murdered people. We're horrible. I just don't like the storyline. I think
it's part of the collective human story.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
There are injustices. You cannot judge people by what the standards by our standards.
Our standards, the American standards,
you have to judge them by the standards of the time in which they lived.
That's interesting. And you're talking about the American standard?
I'm talking about past.
The history,
History.
Yeah.
Not today. I mean,
James Joyce, great poet, said history is a nightmare of injustice, which it always has been in terms of where we are now, from which we're attempting to awaken. Do you think we might be awakening from a historical pattern, including all the history of human consciousness, of scarcity and inability for there to be elemental justice throughout the system? We may be coming on the adverse side of the destructive capability. We have a possibility of bringing the have-like way, or the liberation of the whole of the human society, rather than a few winners who are running things from Rome and so forth on through all of human history at the to the disadvantage of the mass of human society that's been more or less like serfs.
I think that's a big generalization.
Yes,
and
it is.
I think there have always been the possibilities for destruction. When I look at
of the species,
in pockets at least. I mean,
of the species wide. We have that now.
Well,
that's new.
Anyway, I think we have laid this to bed. But I forgot what I was going to say. But people have found all kinds of creative ways to kill each other: guns, machetes.
But we're so much better at it now.
But it's still the same old story.
Yeah. Fight for safe and glory,
Yeah, well, I don't believe we're going to do that.
Well, I sure hope you're right in your optimistic
you do,
assessment
but I
of
do not.
No, I don't think that. I'm saying, I'm just wondering if we're optimistic for the human, you're optimistic for the human prospect.
I absolutely am.
And we have a capability of bringing good to so many more people than we've been able to do historically.
And
don't you think
truth
there's a great ability to have countervailing good to bring justice to the world that you're trying to do with a lot of the work you're doing to bring a just world to the planet, right?
And justice, again, you have to somehow understand that there are many, many different cultures and ways of being. The world has not always been treated as a massive serfs. For example, I was reading about Inca society, and it was riveting. The Inca emperor, the empire, the emperor, of course, was the top of the line.
Always.
But you had then the peers, the nobles, and then you had the people. But what they did was, it was just brilliant. They demanded 30% of the labor of their citizens. And so they would give 30% of their working ability. Let's say if they were weavers or this or that or the other.
They'd have the IU.
They'd give it to the emperor. But in return, they got, this was a totally socialistic society. In return, they were fed, they were clothed, they were protected, they were housed. So it's like thinking of our taxes. For 30% of our income, are we clothed, fed, housed? No, we're not. And
you're talking our being American identity
today.
Yeah, right.
But so when you think of
you
just make just say point blank they're all serfs. No, that was
that's
system.
the historical pattern around the world.
But that I'm telling you, at least in the Inca Empire, you could say they're serfs, but in fact they were citizens who got for their labor, for a portion of their labor, a tremendous amount of protection and.
Absolutely.
So it's a system.
Yeah.
And each system had its own way of being.
And it was called an ayu, I think.
I
It
don't
was
know
the
what
sector
it's
of the Inca. I had lived 2 years there and studied that.
Well,
so I
there
studied
you
the
have it.
history of the Inca
I
and
find the Incas
the Aymara
fascinating.
people who came before them. And it's a big, long history.
I find it fascinating.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, I'm sorry, one of the problems we have a lot of problems in the world. And we have a lot of opportunity in the world to make a better world for this, maybe in a qualitative new way, one would hope. But one of the things we don't have in this world or any of the world is we don't have unlimited time. One of the problems, we've run out of time. We've run out of time for this program. I'm very tired of saying. We just got started on all the things that we could talk about. It's been, and so thank you for coming in. Thanks for such much good work you've been doing.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate that. And give my very best to Miss Watson, who we did a program with a few days ago and so forth.
Who's written a beautiful book called It's My Party.
It is wonderful. It is really, really good. And it's a wonderful thing. And I'm glad that to have you join with her in part of the interviews that I've done here. So thank you, my darling. Thank you very, very much for coming in.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it's your
Here
problem. And what is the name of that book on the Inca? What's it called again?
Oh, the Inca is called The Last Days of the Incas.
Last Day. But what's the other one you said?
Sapiens.
Sapiens. Thank you for that. And here
That's one of the best books.
We've got an email up for
go.
people who want to get in touch with Jacqueline.
That's wonderful.
And Jackie, yeah, that's right. So thanks a lot for coming. Thanks for all the very good work. And thank you in the audience for viewing. It's been your pleasure to have her perceptions. And we invite you to tune in. We're coming back again next week. That's it for now. One more time, darling. Thank you very, very much for coming in.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Good evening. Thank you. Until next time. Thank you.
9 seconds.
No, that's it. That's it. Okay, that's the end.
Okay.
Okay.
All righty. You wanted to talk